At this point, you guys should have your banners all sculpted out. We should have some cool wind in our scene. And now we're going to fray the edges. So how I'm going to show you guys to do this is we're going to actually load in an alpha, and then we're going to place that alpha at the bottom of the banner. And we're going to use that alpha to generate polygroups, and then we're going to delete one of the polygroups. So let's take a look at how to do that. Now, when I went in and sculpted this, I kept in mind that, I'm probably going to be cutting a lot of this cloth on the bottom off because the alpha, it kind of is a little wide. So when we start placing that alpha, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So a couple things to keep in mind with using alphas and polygroups and cutting off extra pieces of geometry. You want to make sure that your poly count is relatively high. Now we only have a little piece of cloth here, but the reason why we want to have our polygons higher than usual is because the resolution or the sharpness of our mask is going to be reliant on how many polygons we have in the scene. I'm going to hold down Command here, and we're going to load in our alpha, and I'm going to kind of show you guys what I mean by that. So I'm holding down Command. I'm going to switch the stroke to drag rectangle. Now what this does is this allows us to place the alpha exactly where we want it to be rather than painting with the alpha. If we left it on freehand, the alpha would just kind of be painting all over our mesh. We don't want that. We want to drop this right where we need it. So next thing we want to do is we want to click on alpha, import, and then navigate to the torn alpha JPEG, and then hit open. Now, by default, this is going to jump back to your standard brush, but don't worry. If you hold down Command, you'll see that all of your settings have been saved. All right, so now what I'm going to show you guys is how the geometry of our mesh affects the resolution or crispness of our mask. So right now I'm sitting at about 18,935 active points or polys on my cloth subtool level here, or layer, I should say. And I want to hold down Command, and I just pen tip to the tablet and draw. Let me zoom in a little bit. What you'll see is it gets a little blurry and choppy on us, and that's not good. We want it to be crisp, or as crisp as we can get it, so that when we cut that edge off, it'll look a lot cleaner. So what we need to do is we need to go into our geometry, and we're going to get a little more geometry here. So I'm going to divide that up. That should be plenty to make this look a lot better. So let's hold down Command and draw this out again. And I'm kind of chugging a little bit. But as you guys can see, it looks a lot more crisp. So that is how our geometry can affect our mask. All right, so before we place our mask, we want to make sure that our brush is set up correctly. Now I know we already did the mask pen, the stroke, we have a drag rectangle and the alpha loaded in, but we want to make sure that the fall off of the brush or the focal shift is set to -100, because if we're using a brush, let's take a look at some examples here. So if we have a brush like this, what'll happen is the edges of our alpha are going to end up getting blurred out a bit, almost like if we were to use an airbrush to place the alpha. All right, so let me show you guys what I mean. In this image here, we're looking at our alpha that was placed with our focal shift at about 50, 56 or so. If we look at the alpha on the actual geometry, and if you look at the outer edges of that alpha that's placed, you can see that they're blurry and not 100% visible. Now in this image, we adjusted our focal shift on the brush, and we drew out our alpha again on the geometry, and now you can see that the edges of the alpha are not quite as blurred. All right, so let's go ahead and place our alpha, create a poly group, and delete this extra geometry out. So holding down Command, pen tip to the tablet and drag, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it where I want it. Something like that looks kind of cool. All right, now the next thing I need to do is I need to switch my brush back over to a regular masking brush. So I just switch to freehand and turn off my alpha. And I'm going to actually scale this brush down a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint out everything from this line and down. The reason why I want to do that is because we want to make sure that when we create our poly groups, we have 2 groups and not 3. So I'm going to hold down Command and just kind of paint this out here. All right, so we're painting that out. And now we can make our poly group. So to do this, let's go on down our menus here and look for poly groups. And we have group mask. Now before we click this button, let's turn on our poly frames. All right, so we can see when it makes this and how it turns out, because we want to have 2 poly groups. One that's going to be deleted, this extra stuff down here, and one that we're going to keep. And we also want to adjust the slider here, which is called polish. So if we crank that up, what it's going to do is it's going to give us a more crisp edge from where we painted our mask. If we leave it at 0, we tend to get a little bit more of a jagged edge. So I'm going to crank that up to 1 and then hit group mask. So now we have 2 separate masks. Now I clicked it twice. If you keep clicking, what'll happen is it'll give you different colors. It doesn't really do anything else once you have your poly groups. All right, so now we have our poly groups here. And I'm going to hold down Command Shift and then tap on the geometry that I want to keep. All right. And I'm going to turn off my poly frame. There's 2 more steps and we're done. Now I want to delete lower subdivision levels. If I don't do this, then not Maya, but ZBrush will yell at us and go, "Hey, you need to freeze this or fix this. I can't do it." So we hit delete lower, and then we go into modify topology and delete hidden. So now if I try to do Command Shift pen tip to the tablet, nothing will come back up, and that geometry that we hid, or that poly group that we hid, is actually deleted out. And that is how we get our really cool frayed edges on our banner.